Today marked the second anniversary of Ayana and Kenan's relationship. Ayana was truly happy to be with Kenan, and she silently thanked God and Malika for bringing him into her life. He was her first love, and she hoped he would also be her last. Kenan took her on the luxury yacht he had rented to bring her to this place. Although it was beautiful, the island looked deserted, and there was no one else around. Ayana asked, "Kenan, why did you bring me here? It feels so empty. It's kind of scary." Kenan kissed her on the forehead and comforted her. "Because today is the second anniversary of our relationship. That's why I wanted to bring you here and make it special." Then he smiled and said, "Now close your eyes. I want to give you a gift. It's a very special one." Ayana looked at him in surprise. "Kenan, you don't have to do this. Let's just treat today like any ordinary day." Even though she said that, deep inside she felt incredibly happy because she believed Kenan was doing all of this out of genuine love for her. "Sweetheart, you are the love of my life. Of course I want to make today special." "Now close your eyes and make a wish," Kenan said. Hearing that, Ayana closed her eyes, clasped her hands together, and wished that she and Kenan would always stay together. What she didn't know was that Kenan was standing behind her, holding a wooden club he had prepared in advance. Deep inside, he was still afraid of what he was about to do, but the money had completely blinded him. "I'm sorry. I hope you'll make it to heaven," he thought to himself. Then he leaned close and whispered one last sentence into her ear. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I promise I'll make good use of the money. Thank you." Before Ayana even had a chance to react to what he had just said, Kenan swung the wooden club with all his strength and struck the back of her head. She collapsed and lost consciousness instantly. He then picked her up and threw her straight into the ocean without the slightest fear or guilt for the horrible thing he had just done. Before he even had a chance to calm himself down, he immediately called his lover. "I just pushed her into the ocean. Soon we'll be rich." He burst into laughter, thrilled that he had successfully carried out the plan. A short while later, Isaac was taking a walk along the beach of an island owned by his family when he suddenly noticed what looked like someone lying in the distance. He immediately ran over and discovered that the young woman was still alive. Without wasting a second, he began performing CPR. It seemed that Ayana was destined to die because of her boyfriend's cruel plan, but God had chosen to let her live. Fate had arranged for her to meet a man named Isaac. Ayana lost both of her parents when she was still a child. After the accident, she moved in with her maternal grandparents in Baltimore and learned to become independent much earlier than most children. She never wanted to burden her grandparents, so as she grew older, studying became the most important part of her life. She believed education was the only way she could build a better future and repay them for everything they had sacrificed. Throughout elementary school and high school, Ayana consistently earned excellent grades and rarely gave her grandparents anything to worry about. After graduating from high school, she was accepted into Towson University, where she majored in marketing. During her first semester, she met Malika. The two had completely different personalities. Ayana was quiet, disciplined, and spent most of her free time studying, while Malika was outgoing, talkative, and loved meeting new people. Because they often sat near each other during lectures, they gradually became friends. Marketing wasn't an easy major, and Malika frequently struggled with assignments. Whenever she needed help, Ayana patiently explained the lessons until she understood them. Grateful for everything Ayana had done, Malika started helping her in return. Since Ayana had spent most of her life focused on school, she lacked experience dealing with everyday social situations. Malika encouraged her to go out more, taught her how to talk to strangers with confidence, and often gave her advice whenever she felt awkward or unsure. Over the next 4 years, the two continued helping each other in different ways. Ayana helped Malika succeed in school, while Malika helped Ayana become more confident outside the classroom. By the time they graduated from college, they had become inseparable and considered each other best friends. After graduating from Towson University, Ayana applied for marketing jobs across Baltimore. After several interviews, she was hired by a marketing agency that specialized in branding and digital marketing for businesses. Since it was her first full-time job, she worked harder than almost everyone else. Whenever she finished her own assignments, she offered to help her coworkers instead of leaving early. If someone new joined the company, she patiently answered their questions and shared everything she had learned. Her attitude quickly earned the respect of both her coworkers and managers. Whenever an important project came up, Her supervisor often trusted her to lead it. 3 years later, at just 25 years old, Ayanna had become one of the agency's senior marketing strategists. She earned a good salary, regularly helped support her grandparents, and still managed to save money every month. Everything in her life seemed to be going well except for one thing. She had never had a boyfriend. It wasn't because men weren't interested in her. Quite the opposite. She was attractive, kind, and easy to talk to. So men often approached her at coffee shops, asked for her number after work, or were introduced through mutual friends. Ayanna always gave them a chance, but the results were almost always the same. She had no idea how to flirt, rarely understood romantic hints, and answered everything so honestly that conversations quickly became awkward. After a few weeks, most of those men quietly stopped calling or texting her. Even her coworkers liked teasing her about it. One afternoon during lunch, one of them laughed and said, "You're smart, beautiful, and successful. The only problem is, you treat every date like a business meeting." Everyone at the table laughed, including Ayanna. She knew they weren't entirely wrong. She had spent so much of her life focusing on studying and building her career that she never really learned how relationships worked. By the time she turned 25, she had started wondering if she would ever meet the right person. One Saturday evening, Malika called Ayanna. "Are you busy tonight?" "Not really." "Why?" "I've been stuck at work all week. Let's grab a few drinks." Ayanna agreed without thinking much about it. Later that evening, the two met at one of their favorite neighborhood bars. After ordering a few drinks and some appetizers, they spent a while talking about work before Malika suddenly smiled. "So, have you found a boyfriend yet?" Ayanna shook her head and laughed helplessly. "No, honestly, I'm getting tired of being single." Malika looked at her for a few seconds before saying, "How about I introduce you to someone?" Ayanna looked surprised. "Who?" "A friend of mine. He's a really good guy. Respectful, responsible, and I've known him for years." Ayanna smiled. "You make him sound perfect," Malika laughed. "Then meet him once and decide for yourself." After thinking for a moment, Ayanna nodded. "All right, I'll give it a try." A few days later, Malika arranged another dinner and invited both of them. That night was the first time Ayanna met Kenan. The three chatted comfortably over dinner while Malika kept the conversation flowing whenever it became quiet. About an hour later, Malika suddenly glanced at her phone. "Oh no, I completely forgot I promised to help my cousin tonight." She quickly stood up, grabbed her bag, and smiled. "You two keep talking. I'll head out first." Before leaving, she casually winked at Kanan. The gesture was so quick and natural that Ayanna never noticed it. After Malika walked away, only Ayanna and Kanan remained at the table. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Kanan smiled. "Looks like we're supposed to get to know each other now." Ayanna couldn't help laughing. "I guess we are." The awkwardness gradually faded as the conversation became more relaxed, and before either of them realized it, another hour had quietly passed. As they continued talking, Ayanna gradually relaxed. It had been an exhausting week at work, and without paying attention, she drank much more than she normally would. By the time dinner was over, she was clearly tipsy. Kanan looked at her with concern. "Are you okay?" Ayanna laughed and rubbed her forehead. "I think I drank a little too much." Kanan glanced toward the parking lot. "Did you drive here?" Ayanna nodded. "Yeah. Then you're definitely not driving home tonight. Where do you live?" After Ayanna gave him her address, she quietly handed him her car keys without arguing. About 30 minutes later, Kanan parked in front of her house, walked her to the front door, and waited until she unlocked it. "Can you make it from here?" he asked. Ayanna nodded with a tired smile. "I'll be fine." Kenan looked at her for another second before saying, "Drink plenty of water before you go to sleep." "I will." "All right. Good night." Without asking to come inside or trying to take advantage of the situation, Kenan simply turned around and left. The next morning, Ayanna woke up with a slight headache. As she remembered everything that had happened the night before, she couldn't help smiling. She had only met Kanan once, yet he had made sure she got home safely and left without expecting anything in return. For the first time, she thought Malika might have been right about him. From that day on, Kanan started asking Ayanna out more often. Sometimes they had dinner after work. Other times they met for coffee on weekends or took walks around Baltimore's Inner Harbor. As they spent more time together, Ayanna gradually became comfortable around him. One afternoon, while browsing through a bookstore, Ayana stopped in front of a shelf and picked up a mystery novel she had been wanting to read for weeks. Before she could say anything, Kanan smiled. "That's my favorite author." Ayana looked at him in surprise. "Seriously? I hardly know anyone who reads his books." Kanan nodded. "Most people think they're too slow, but I love them." A few days later, they visited the National Aquarium. As they watched the sea turtles swimming past the glass, Ayana smiled. "I've always liked coming here more than amusement parks. It's peaceful." Kanan laughed. "I thought I was the only one. Everyone else wants roller coasters. I'd choose this any day." Another weekend, they stopped at a small cafe hidden on a quiet side street. Ayana looked around before smiling. Places like this are so much better than crowded coffee chains. Kanan looked around the cozy cafe and nodded. Exactly. The quieter it is, the easier it is to think. Moments like these kept happening over the following months. Every time Ayana casually mentioned something she liked, Kanan somehow felt the same way. Little by little, she began believing they understood each other better than anyone else she had ever met. She never questioned why they shared so many similarities. Instead, she convinced herself that maybe fate had simply brought the right person into her life. By the time Kanan finally asked her to be his girlfriend, Ayana already trusted him completely. Smiling through slightly nervous eyes, she accepted without hesitation. As their relationship became more stable, Kanan gradually became part of Ayana's life. He visited her grandparents whenever he had time, always greeted them politely, helped carry groceries into the house, and never hesitated to lend a hand whenever something needed fixing. Before long, her grandparents grew fond of him and believed Ayana had finally found someone who truly cared about her. Even her coworkers had nothing but good things to say whenever Kanan stopped by the office to pick her up after work. To everyone around her, he seemed like the perfect boyfriend. The more people praised him, the more Ayana trusted him. One evening, while the two were relaxing at home after dinner, Kanan suddenly said, "I've been thinking about something lately." Ayana looked up from her phone. "What is it?" "A lot of people have been buying accident insurance these days. You never know what could happen. If something ever happened to me, I'd want you to receive the benefits instead of leaving you with nothing." Before Ayana could answer, Malika, who happened to be visiting that evening, frowned and interrupted. "What's wrong with you? Why are you talking about dying out of nowhere?" Kanan laughed. "I'm not saying I'm going to die. I'm just talking about being prepared. Accidents happen. People get sick. Nobody knows what's coming tomorrow." Ayana thought about it for a moment before smiling. "If we're doing it, then let's buy policies for both of us. It would be strange if only you had one." Kanan smiled and nodded. "That works too." A few days later, the two completed all the paperwork. Since Kanan worked an ordinary office job and didn't make much money, most of their monthly living expenses were already being covered by Ayana. The insurance premiums weren't cheap either, so Ayana paid for both policies without complaining. She earned enough to afford it, and more importantly, she believed Kanan was working hard for their future together. To her, money was never the most important part of a relationship. As long as they trusted and supported each other, everything else could be figured out later. After buying the insurance, life continued exactly as it always had. Life continued peacefully after that. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and before either of them realized it, their second anniversary was only a few days away. During that time, Ayana continued paying for most of their household expenses because she earned much more than Kanan, but she never complained. She believed he was doing his best, and more importantly, she believed he truly loved her. Money had never been the foundation of their relationship. Trust was. One evening, while they were having dinner together, Kanan suddenly smiled and said, "Our second anniversary is almost here." Ayana looked up and smiled back. "I know. I can't believe it's already been 2 years." Kanan reached over and gently held her hand. "I've been thinking about this for a long time. I haven't really done anything special for you since we started dating. You've always been the one taking care of me, supporting me, and believing in me. This time, I want to surprise you." Ayana's eyes lit up immediately. "Really? What kind of surprise?" Kanan laughed and shook his head. "If I tell you now, it won't be a surprise anymore." Ayana pouted playfully. "Come on, just give me a little hint." "Nope. You'll find out soon enough." She stared at him for a few seconds before giving up and laughing. "Fine, I'll wait." Kanan smiled. I promise it'll be something you'll never forget. Hearing that, Ayana stood up, walked over to him, and wrapped her arms around him with a bright smile. Now you've made me even more excited. Kanan hugged her back, hiding the cold smile that never reached his eyes. To Ayana, the upcoming trip was nothing more than a romantic surprise prepared by the man she loved. She had no idea that every detail of the trip had already been planned long before that night, and that the anniversary she had been looking forward to would soon become the worst day of her life. A few days later, the day of their second anniversary finally arrived. Early that morning, Kanan met Ayana at the airport. She smiled as soon as she saw him. Are you finally going to tell me where we're going? Kanan laughed and shook his head. Not yet. Just wait a little longer. After checking in, the two boarded their flight to a famous group of islands off the coast. The flight lasted a little over 2 hours. Even after they landed, Kanan still refused to tell her anything about the surprise. Instead, he led her straight to a nearby marina, where he had already booked 2 tickets for a small sightseeing boat. Believing everything was part of the anniversary trip, Ayana happily followed him aboard. As the boat sailed farther and farther away from the main island, the number of tourists gradually disappeared until the ocean around them became completely quiet. About an hour later, they arrived near a small, deserted island surrounded by crystal-clear water. Ayana looked around with a smile before her expression slowly changed. It's beautiful, but why is it so empty? I don't see anyone else. Kanan smiled and replied, That's what makes it special. This is your anniversary surprise, an island where nobody can bother us. It's just the 2 of us. Ayana smiled again, feeling relieved. I have to admit, this is pretty romantic. Kanan stepped closer and gently held both of her shoulders. Close your eyes, Ayana laughed. Why? Because your real surprise is about to begin. Without the slightest suspicion, she slowly closed her eyes, smiling as she waited for whatever Kanan had prepared. Behind her, Kanan quietly reached beneath one of the seats and pulled out the wooden stick he had hidden before boarding the boat. He walked toward her one slow step at a time until he was standing directly behind her. Looking at the woman who trusted him with all her heart, he quietly whispered, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I promise I'll make good use of the money. Before Ayana could even react, Kanan swung the stick with all his strength. The blow landed on the back of her head, knocking her unconscious almost instantly. Without showing the slightest hesitation, he grabbed her body and shoved her over the side of the boat. A second later, he threw the wooden stick into the ocean after her, making sure the murder weapon disappeared beneath the waves as well. He stood there for a few moments, calmly watching the water until there was no sign of Ayana left. Then he took out a cleaning spray and carefully wiped away every drop of blood from the deck. Once he was certain nothing suspicious remained, he put the spray away, leaned back in his seat, and quietly admired the endless ocean stretching out before him. There wasn't a trace of guilt on his face. Instead, he sat there imagining the $1 million that would soon belong to him. According to his plan, he would remain on the boat for another hour before returning, so the timeline would look more convincing if the police questioned him later. After enough time had passed, he finally picked up his phone and called Malika. She answered almost immediately. Well? Kanan couldn't hide the smile on his face. Your plan worked perfectly. I have to admit, you're even scarier than I thought. Malika smiled on the other end of the line. I only did what was necessary for our future. Now all we have to do is wait. After staying near the island for about another hour, Kanan finally started the boat and returned to the marina. By the time he arrived back on the main island, the sun was already beginning to set. Instead of going home, he rushed straight to the local police station, his clothes still slightly wet from the boat ride. As soon as he walked inside, he looked panicked. Please, you have to help me. My girlfriend is missing. One of the officers immediately asked him to calm down and explain what had happened. Kanan took a deep breath, pretending to fight back tears before speaking. We came here for our second anniversary. We rented a sightseeing boat and stopped near one of the small islands. She wanted to swim for a while, so I stayed on the boat waiting for her. After a few minutes, I couldn't see her anymore. I searched everywhere and kept calling her name, but she never came back. His voice trembled as he spoke, making every word sound believable. Within minutes, several rescue teams were dispatched to the area. Patrol boats, divers, and helicopters searched the surrounding waters until nightfall, without finding any sign of Ayanna. The search continued throughout the next day, but there was still nothing. On the second day, the authorities expanded the search area even farther, hoping the ocean currents might have carried her somewhere else. They searched nearby islands, checked the surrounding coastline, and questioned everyone who had been in the area that day. Still, there was no trace of Ayanna. By the end of the second day, one of the lead investigators approached Kanan with a sympathetic expression. "Mr. Kanan, we're not giving up, but we've searched every area we reasonably could. If we discover anything, you'll be the first person we contact." Kanan lowered his head before suddenly breaking into tears. He buried his face in his hands as his shoulders shook uncontrollably. "This can't be happening. Today's supposed to be our anniversary. I promised her this would be the happiest trip of our lives. Why? Why did this happen?" The officers standing nearby could only watch in silence. His grief looked completely genuine. None of them had the slightest reason to suspect that the man crying in front of them was the very person responsible for Ayanna's disappearance. After leaving the police station, Kanan got into his car. The tears vanished from his face almost instantly. He glanced at his phone, a faint smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. As far as he was concerned, everything had gone exactly according to plan. While Kanan was busy convincing everyone that Ayanna had disappeared forever, the ocean had carried her somewhere else. Unconscious and drifting with the waves, she was swept toward a small private island several miles away. The strong current eventually pushed her onto the beach, where she lay motionless with a deep wound on the back of her head. By an incredible stroke of luck, she was still breathing. Around the same time, Isaac was spending a few days on the island, which had belonged to his family for many years. Whenever work became too overwhelming, he would come there alone to clear his mind before returning to Baltimore. That afternoon, he was taking his usual walk along the beach when he suddenly noticed what looked like someone lying near the shoreline. At first, he thought it was debris washed in by the tide, but as he got closer, he realized it was a young woman. Isaac immediately ran toward her and knelt beside her. He checked her pulse first before gently turning her over. She's still alive. Without wasting another second, he began performing first aid, clearing the seawater from her airway and checking her breathing. After several tense moments, Ayanna suddenly coughed and spit out seawater, but she remained unconscious. Isaac let out a quiet breath of relief before carefully lifting her into his arms. As he carried her toward his yacht, he looked back at the rough sea and shook his head. "You're incredibly lucky. The waves are unusually strong today. I don't even know how you managed to drift all the way here." Once aboard, he instructed the captain to head back immediately. Isaac had no idea who the woman was or what had happened to her, but after finding her on the edge of death, there was only one thing on his mind. He had to save her. The yacht returned to the main island as quickly as possible. Instead of reporting the incident to the local police, Isaac took Ayanna straight to the nearest hospital because her condition was still critical, and he didn't want to waste even a single minute. As soon as they arrived, the medical staff rushed her into the emergency room while Isaac waited outside. Nearly an hour later, the doctor finally came out. "She's alive, but she suffered a severe head injury. We've stabilized her condition, but this hospital doesn't have the equipment she needs. She should be transferred to a larger hospital immediately." Isaac nodded without hesitation. "Arrange the transfer. I'll take care of everything else." He immediately called his assistant. "Prepare the family's private jet. I want it ready as soon as possible." "Yes, Mr. Isaac." While Isaac was arranging everything to save Ayanna's life, rescue teams continued searching the ocean where she had disappeared. The search lasted for 2 full days. The police expanded the search area to nearby islands, including the private island owned by Isaac's family. But no one there knew anything about a missing woman because Isaac had already taken Ayanna away long before the search reached that area. With no body, no witnesses, and no evidence of foul play, the investigation eventually came to a standstill. A few hours later, Ayanna was transferred by ambulance to the airport before being flown back to Baltimore aboard Isaac's family's private jet under the supervision of a medical team. At almost the same time, the lead detective met Kanan one last time. He handed him a business card before placing a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Kanan, we've done everything we could. If we find anything, you'll be the first person we contact." Kanan slowly nodded before suddenly collapsing onto the floor. Several officers rushed over to help him. A few moments later, he opened his eyes and burst into tears. Ayana, why did you leave me? Today was supposed to be our second anniversary. We were supposed to grow old together. His heartbreaking performance convinced everyone around him that he was nothing more than a devastated man who had just lost the love of his life. After leaving the police station, Kanan headed straight to the airport and boarded the next available flight back to Baltimore. Several hours later, as he walked out of the arrival terminal, Malika was already waiting for him. The moment they saw each other, they wrapped their arms around each other and shared a long, passionate kiss. "It's finally over," Kanan said with a grin. Malika smiled back. "I told you my plan would work." The two left the airport together to celebrate what they believed was the perfect crime, completely unaware that Ayana was still alive. Nearly 2 years earlier, long before Ayana ever met Kanan, both Kanan and Malika had already buried themselves in debt because of their reckless lifestyles. Kanan had grown up in a family that was once financially comfortable. His parents had owned a successful business for years, but poor investments and constant overspending eventually destroyed everything they had built. By the time Kanan graduated from college, his family had lost almost all of their wealth. Instead of learning from what had happened, he inherited the same bad habits. Although he only earned an average office salary, he constantly spent money on expensive clothes, luxury restaurants, gambling, and nights out with friends. He also looked down on people he considered beneath him. Whenever he saw homeless people asking for money or elderly vendors selling food on the street, he often mocked them instead of showing any sympathy. Malika wasn't much different. She loved expensive handbags, designer clothes, and weekend parties, even though she couldn't actually afford that lifestyle. She frequently maxed out her credit cards, spent money she didn't have, and casually dated different men whenever it benefited her. Neither of them knew how to manage money, and both believed they could always figure things out later. Eventually, later arrived. One night, after checking into a hotel together, the two sat down and started going through their bank accounts and credit card statements. The mood in the room quickly turned silent. Between gambling losses, credit card debt, personal loans, and unpaid bills, they realized they owed nearly $50,000. Kanan threw his phone onto the bed and ran both hands through his hair. "We're screwed." Malika stared at the numbers on her own screen without saying a word. After several minutes of silence, she slowly looked up. A smile began forming on her face. "I have an idea." Kanan frowned. "What kind of idea?" Malika leaned closer. "I have a friend?" "So?" "She's naive. She's never been in a relationship before. She's easy to trust, and she's making good money." Kanan looked at her in confusion. "What are you trying to say?" Malika smiled coldly. "I'll introduce the two of you." Kanan stared at her for several seconds before laughing awkwardly. "Are you serious? You're trying to sell your own boyfriend?" "Relax," Malika replied. "She's pretty, so it's not like you're sacrificing anything. Besides, I'll tell you everything about her. What she likes, what she doesn't like, how to make her trust you. It won't take long before she falls for you." Kanan still looked hesitant. "And then what?" Malika's smile became even colder. "Then we wait." "Wait for what?" "For her to trust you completely." She paused before continuing. "When the time is right, convince her to buy accident insurance with you. After 2 years, if one of you dies unexpectedly and the insurance company finds nothing suspicious, the surviving beneficiary gets the payout." Kanan slowly straightened up in his chair. "How much?" $1 million. The room fell silent. Kanan lowered his head and thought about it. At first, the idea sounded insane, but the more Malika explained every step of the plan, the more realistic it began to feel. She had already thought through everything, from how he would approach Ayana, to how long he needed to stay in the relationship, to how they would make her death look like a tragic accident. As Malika continued laying out every detail, Kanan's hesitation slowly disappeared. The fear in his eyes was gradually replaced by excitement. He wasn't thinking about murder anymore. He was thinking about $1 million. From that night on, the cruel plan that would eventually destroy Ayana's life had already begun. After landing in Baltimore, Isaac's private ambulance took the young woman directly to one of the city's best hospitals, where his family had been one of the institution's largest donors for generations. The moment they arrived, the hospital director personally came downstairs to greet him. After briefly checking her condition, Isaac said firmly, "I don't care how much it costs. I want the best doctors treating her." Do whatever it takes to save her. Within minutes, she was transferred into surgery while specialists from multiple departments were called in to examine her injuries. Several hours later, the lead neurosurgeon finally walked out of the operating room. Mr. Isaac, the surgery was successful. Her vital signs are stable now, but the injury to the back of her head was severe. The next few days will be critical. Isaac let out a quiet sigh of relief. Thank you, doctor. Even after receiving the good news, he refused to leave. He stayed at the hospital until late that night, making sure every necessary treatment had been arranged before finally returning home. Over the next 3 days, Isaac visited the hospital whenever he finished work. Some days he stayed for only a few minutes, while other days he remained for hours, asking the doctors about every small change in her condition. On the morning of the 4th day, while Isaac was in the middle of an executive meeting, his phone suddenly rang. Seeing the hospital's number, he excused himself immediately and answered the call. Mr. Isaac, the doctor said, she's awake. Isaac didn't wait to hear anything else. He left the meeting, got into his car, and drove straight to the hospital. When he entered the room, the young woman was already sitting up in bed. She looked around nervously before her eyes stopped on Isaac. Who? Are you? Before Isaac could answer, the neurosurgeon stepped forward. We've completed another examination. Physically, she's recovering well, but the head trauma appears to have caused temporary memory loss. She doesn't remember who she is, where she came from, or even her own name. Isaac immediately turned toward the doctor. Will she recover? There's a good chance she will, but we can't predict when. Her memories haven't necessarily disappeared. They're most likely blocked because of the trauma. Interestingly, her instincts and personal preferences should still remain. If the people around her gradually expose her to familiar places, activities, foods, or hobbies, those memories may slowly return. Isaac nodded. I understand. After the doctors left the room, the young woman looked at Isaac again, still searching his face for answers. Isaac pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down. My name is Isaac, he said calmly. I'm your cousin. We haven't seen each other in years because our families have lived far apart. I heard you were in an accident, so I came here as soon as I could. She lowered her head and whispered, I don't remember anything. I don't even know my own name. Isaac remained silent for a few seconds before speaking again. Then, until your memories come back, let me call you Hope. She looked at him in confusion. Hope? Isaac smiled gently. Because I believe you'll remember everything one day. Until then, I don't want you to feel like someone without a name. She quietly repeated it to herself. Hope. After a moment, a faint smile finally appeared on her face. I like that name, Isaac nodded. Then Hope it is. She smiled politely before looking out the window, still unable to remember a single thing about the life she had lived before opening her eyes in that hospital room. A few days later, the doctors confirmed that Hope was healthy enough to leave the hospital. Since she still couldn't remember who she was or where she belonged, Isaac brought her back to his mansion. Before they arrived, he had already instructed everyone in the house not to mention anything that might confuse her. He introduced Hope as his cousin who had recently been injured in an accident. With no memories to rely on and no one else she believed she could trust, Hope accepted his explanation and quietly moved in. During the day, Isaac continued managing his technology company while several housekeepers looked after Hope. They reminded her to take her medicine, prepared her meals, and stayed with her whenever she wanted to go outside. Every evening after work, the first thing Isaac asked was, "How was she today?" If the staff told him she had smiled a little more or eaten better than the day before, he quietly felt relieved. Remembering what the neurologist had told him, Isaac spent every weekend taking Hope somewhere different in hopes of triggering her memories. One weekend, they visited an art museum. She admired every painting but remembered nothing. The following weekend, they went to an aquarium. She stood for several minutes watching the sea turtles swim past the glass. For a brief moment, an unexplained sadness crossed her face before a sudden pain shot through the back of her head. Isaac immediately asked if she was all right. Hope forced a small smile and said it was probably just a headache. By the time they left the aquarium, the feeling had already disappeared, and neither of them thought much about it. Another weekend, they wandered through a botanical garden where Hope happily stopped to smell nearly every flower they passed, but nothing happened. Isaac never looked disappointed in front of her. He simply smiled and suggested another place for the following weekend. As time passed, Going out together gradually became part of their routine. Sometimes they had dinner after returning home. Sometimes they watched movies together in the living room before laughing over which movie to watch next. Other weekends, they explored different parts of Baltimore or simply sat in a quiet cafe talking about whatever came to mind. Although Hope still couldn't remember anything about her past, she slowly became comfortable living beside Isaac. Before either of them realized it, nearly a year had quietly passed, and the mansion no longer felt like a stranger's home to Hope. It had become the only place in the world where she truly felt safe. Nearly a year had passed since Hope moved into Isaac's home. Somewhere during that time, Isaac finally admitted to himself that he had fallen in love with her. He tried convincing himself those feelings would eventually disappear, but they only grew stronger with each passing day. Without realizing it, the way he treated Hope slowly began to change. Whenever they crossed the street, he instinctively reached for her hand before quickly letting go as if nothing had happened. If the weather turned cold, he quietly draped his jacket over her shoulders. Whenever they went out for dinner, he naturally placed food onto her plate before serving himself. If she looked at something for more than a few seconds while shopping, Isaac would secretly buy it before they left. To him, those little things came naturally. To Hope, however, they gradually became difficult to ignore. She had always believed Isaac was her cousin, so some of his actions no longer felt normal. One afternoon, the two were walking through a shopping district when Hope stopped in front of a boutique to admire a dress displayed in the window. She smiled for a moment before continuing to walk away. A few minutes later, Isaac quietly handed her a shopping bag. Hope looked inside and froze. It was the same dress she had just been looking at. "Why did you buy this?" she asked. Isaac smiled casually. "Because you liked it." Hope looked at him for a few seconds before accepting the bag. "Thank you, but you really didn't have to." Isaac simply smiled and changed the subject, but Hope couldn't stop thinking about it. A few days later, they went to watch a movie together. As they walked back to the car afterward, a strong breeze blew several strands of hair across Hope's face. Without thinking, Isaac reached over and gently tucked her hair behind her ear. The moment their eyes met, both of them froze. Isaac immediately pulled his hand back. "Sorry, I wasn't thinking." Hope forced a small smile, but the atmosphere instantly became awkward. On the drive home, neither of them said much. That night, Hope lay awake in bed, replaying the past several months in her mind. The expensive gifts, the little acts of care, the way Isaac always seemed to worry about her more than anyone else. None of it felt like the way family normally behaved. She didn't dislike his kindness, but she couldn't understand why it suddenly felt so different. From that day on, she found herself becoming more aware of every little thing Isaac did whenever they were together, while Isaac struggled harder and harder to hide feelings that were becoming impossible to keep to himself. One afternoon, Hope decided to spend some time alone at a small cafe while Isaac was still at work. She found a seat by the window, ordered a cup of coffee, and quietly watched people passing by outside. About 20 minutes later, a well-dressed young man sitting nearby walked over with a friendly smile. "Hi, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I noticed you as soon as I walked in. Would it be all right if I got your number?" Hope smiled politely. She had just opened her mouth to answer when another voice suddenly came from behind her. "She's my girlfriend." Both of them turned around at the same time. Isaac was standing there, looking directly at the man. The stranger immediately raised both hands with an awkward smile. "Sorry, I didn't know." After the man walked away, Isaac gently took Hope's hand. "Let's go." Still confused, Hope followed him outside without saying a word. The drive home was unusually quiet. Isaac kept both hands on the steering wheel while Hope occasionally glanced at him, waiting for him to explain what had happened. As soon as they entered the house, Hope stopped in the living room and turned to face him. "What was that back there?" Isaac remained silent for several seconds before speaking. "I didn't like seeing another man asking for your number." Hope frowned. "Why?" Isaac took a deep breath. "Because I love you." Hope stared at him without saying a word. Isaac lowered his head before continuing. "There's something else I need to tell you. I'm not your cousin." Hope's expression changed instantly. "What?" "I lied to you. When I found you, you'd already lost your memory. I didn't know who your family was, and I was afraid you'd panic if you woke up surrounded by strangers. So I told you I was your cousin because I thought it would make you feel safe." Hope took 2 slow steps backward. "You've been lying to me this whole time?" Isaac nodded. Yes, I'm sorry. Tears quickly filled Hope's eyes. She shook her head, turned around, and ran upstairs before locking herself inside her bedroom. Isaac hurried after her and knocked on the door. Hope, please open the door. I'm sorry. No answer came from inside. The first day passed without her leaving the room. The second day was no different. She barely touched the meals left outside her door, and no matter how many times Isaac apologized, she refused to answer. Late that night, Isaac walked into the garden beneath her bedroom window and shouted, "Hope, I love you!" The room remained silent. He shouted again, "If you don't come out, I'll keep yelling until everyone around here wakes up." He continued, shouting for nearly 10 minutes before the bedroom window finally slid open. Hope leaned out and frowned. "Will you stop? You're going to wake the whole neighborhood." Isaac looked up at her. "Then let me explain." After a long silence, Hope finally came downstairs. The two sat facing each other in the living room while Isaac told her everything from the day he found her on the beach to the reason he had lied about being her cousin. "I know I was wrong," he said quietly, "but every decision I made was because I wanted to protect you. Somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." Hope lowered her head without saying anything. She remembered every moment over the past year. Isaac had never forced her to do anything, never taken advantage of her vulnerability, and never asked for anything in return. Everything he had done had been to help her recover. Her anger slowly faded, but she still wasn't ready to answer him. Over the following weeks, the two continued spending time together honestly, no longer pretending to be family. Little by little, Hope realized her feelings had also changed. One evening, after they returned from a walk together, she looked at Isaac, smiled softly, and said, "I'd like to give us a chance." Isaac smiled back without saying another word. He quietly stepped forward and wrapped her in a gentle hug, and this time, Hope didn't pull away. Several months had passed since Hope and Isaac officially became a couple. Life had finally settled into a peaceful routine. Whenever Isaac had free time, he took Hope out to explore different places around Baltimore. Although she still couldn't remember who she really was, she had gradually stopped forcing herself to remember and simply chose to enjoy the life she had now. One weekend, Isaac suggested spending the afternoon at a nearby amusement park. "I haven't been to one in years," he said with a smile. Hope laughed. "Neither have I. At least I don't think I have." The two spent the afternoon trying different rides, eating snacks, and teasing each other like any ordinary couple. After walking around for a while, Hope suddenly stopped in front of a carousel. She stared at it for several seconds before quietly saying, "I don't know why, but I really want to ride that." Isaac smiled. "Then let's go." The two climbed onto the carousel as cheerful music began filling the air. As the horses slowly moved up and down, Hope closed her eyes for a brief moment. Suddenly, countless memories flashed through her mind. She saw herself as a little girl laughing while riding the same kind of carousel. She saw her father lifting her onto one of the horses while her mother stood nearby smiling. The memories became faster and faster. Her grandparents, college, Canaan, the insurance policy, the anniversary trip, the deserted island. Canaan whispering behind her, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I promise I'll make good use of the money." The blow to the back of her head, the freezing ocean. Hope suddenly opened her eyes as her breathing became rapid. Everything around her began spinning before she collapsed unconscious. "Hope!" Isaac caught her before she hit the ground and immediately carried her to the car. He drove straight to the hospital without wasting a second. After several examinations, the doctor finally walked into the room. "There's nothing physically wrong with her. Her body is completely stable." The sudden return of her memories most likely caused severe emotional shock. A few minutes later, Hope slowly opened her eyes. Before Isaac could say anything, she suddenly grabbed the pillow beside her and threw it across the room. She reached for a glass on the bedside table and smashed it against the wall. "No, no!" she screamed as tears streamed down her face. The nurses rushed toward her, but Isaac immediately stopped them. "Please, give her a moment." After everyone left the room, Isaac slowly walked toward the bed. "Hope!" She shook her head violently. "Please, leave me alone." Isaac quietly nodded. "I'll be right outside." He gently closed the door behind him and sat alone in the hallway. Nearly an hour later, the crying inside the room gradually faded. The door slowly opened, and she suddenly threw herself into Isaac's arms. Her whole body trembled as she cried uncontrollably. "I remember everything." Isaac held her tightly. "What do you remember?" She slowly looked up at him, tears still running down her face. "Hope isn't my name." She took a shaky breath. "My name is Ayanna." She broke down, crying again, and clutched Isaac's shirt with trembling hands. "Canaan tried to kill me. He hit me from behind, then pushed me into the ocean. He wanted me dead." Isaac stood there in complete silence, his arms still around Ayanna. After several minutes, he gently helped her sit back down on the hospital bed and handed her a glass of water. Once she had calmed down, he quietly said, "Tell me everything from the beginning." Ayanna took a deep breath before slowly telling him about her life. She told him how she had lost her parents when she was young, how her grandparents had raised her, how she met Canaan, how they fell in love, and how they bought the insurance policy together nearly 2 years earlier. Finally, she described everything that had happened on the anniversary trip. She remembered Canaan asking her to close her eyes because he had one last surprise for her. She remembered hearing him whisper, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I promise I'll make good use of the money." The next thing she remembered was the sharp pain in the back of her head before falling into the freezing ocean. As Ayanna spoke, Isaac's expression grew colder with every sentence. By the time she finished, his fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. A vein bulged across his forehead as he struggled to control his anger. Without realizing it, he had bitten down so hard that blood slowly trickled from the corner of his mouth. Ayanna immediately grabbed his hand. "Isaac." He slowly looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have found out who you were sooner." Ayanna shook her head. "You saved my life. If you hadn't found me that day, I would have died." Isaac gently held both of her hands. "I promise you something." Ayanna looked into his eyes. "Canaan is going to pay for what he did." After leaving the hospital later that day, Isaac immediately instructed his private investigation team to reopen everything connected to Ayanna's disappearance. He ordered them to investigate Canaan's background, his finances, his relationships, his phone records, and everyone who had been close to him during the past 2 years. Over the following weeks, the investigators worked around the clock. They interviewed people, reviewed financial records, tracked Canaan's daily movements, and reconstructed the timeline leading up to Ayanna's disappearance. Eventually, they confirmed several suspicious details surrounding the insurance policy and Canaan's behavior after Ayanna went missing. However, none of it was enough to prove he had attempted to murder her. There were no witnesses, no murder weapon, and no physical evidence connecting him directly to the attack. Even if Ayanna came forward alive, Canaan could still claim she had fallen into the ocean accidentally and struck her head on the rocks. The investigation reached another dead end. One afternoon, Ayanna visited Isaac at his office. She found him sitting alone behind his desk with several investigation files scattered across it. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead in frustration. Ayanna quietly walked over and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "It's okay," she whispered. "We'll figure something out." As she looked down at the photographs spread across the desk, her eyes suddenly stopped on one particular picture. She froze. "Wait." Isaac looked up. "What is it?" Ayanna slowly picked up the photograph with trembling hands. "I know her." Isaac immediately stood up. "Who is she?" Ayanna continued staring at the photograph, her hands beginning to tremble. "Her name is Malika. She was my best friend." Isaac frowned. "You're sure?" Ayanna nodded without hesitation. "I'm sure. We went to college together. She was the one who introduced me to Canaan." Isaac quickly spread the remaining photographs across the desk. Many of them showed Canaan and Malika entering restaurants together, leaving luxury hotels, shopping side by side, and holding hands. There were even pictures of them kissing. Ayanna covered her mouth in disbelief as tears slowly filled her eyes. "No, this can't be." Isaac gently held her shoulders. "Ayanna." She shook her head repeatedly. "After I disappeared, they were together?" Isaac silently nodded. Ayanna slowly sat down on the couch, unable to take her eyes off the photographs. Her breathing became heavier as countless memories involving Malika replayed in her mind. She remembered Malika encouraging her to give Canaan a chance. She remembered Malika constantly telling her how lucky she was to have such a caring boyfriend. She remembered Malika always asking about her relationship whenever they met. Back then, she had believed her best friend was simply happy for her. Looking back now, every question suddenly carried a completely different meaning. Isaac quietly asked, "Did Malika ever know about the insurance policy?" Ayana thought for several seconds before slowly nodding. "Yes, I remember telling her after Kanan and I bought it. She even joked that we trusted each other more than married couples." Isaac remained silent, carefully piecing everything together. Ayana suddenly looked up at him. "Isaac, I don't think this was just Kanan." Isaac frowned. "Why do you say that?" Ayana took a deep breath. "Malika knew everything about me. She knew my personality. She knew I'd never been in a relationship before. She knew exactly what kind of man I'd fall for. She even knew all my hobbies." She lowered her eyes toward the photographs again. "What if none of this was a coincidence?" The room fell completely silent. Isaac slowly looked back at the investigation files on his desk. Until that moment, he had been trying to prove Kanan had attempted to murder Ayana. Now, for the first time, another possibility appeared before him. Kanan might not have acted alone. Ayana sat quietly for several minutes before finally breaking the silence. "There's something I just remembered." Isaac looked at her. "What is it?" Ayana took a deep breath. "Kanan never let anyone touch his phone. Even when we were together, he always kept it with him. At the time, I thought he was just protecting his privacy. But looking back now, I think he may have been hiding something." Isaac frowned. "Go on." "If Malika really planned everything with him, there's a chance they exchanged messages or even voice recordings. Kanan was the type of person who liked keeping things. If we're lucky, some of it might still be on his phone." Isaac leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully. "The problem is getting access to it." Ayana fell silent for a moment before another thought crossed her mind. Malika. Isaac looked at her again. "What about her? I know her better than anyone. She loves expensive things. Luxury brands, VIP clubs, rich men. She also gets bored easily and always likes attention from handsome guys." Isaac immediately understood where she was going. "You want to use that against her?" Ayana slowly nodded before looking directly into his eyes. "I need you to pretend to be exactly the kind of man she can't resist." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "You want me to flirt with her?" Ayana couldn't help smiling despite everything that had happened. "I know it sounds ridiculous, but you're probably the only person who can get close enough to her." Isaac folded his arms and let out a helpless laugh. "You're asking your own boyfriend to seduce another woman," Ayana smiled. "Only for a little while." Isaac sighed dramatically before shaking his head. "I can't believe I'm agreeing to this." Over the next several days, the two carefully planned every detail. Ayana told Isaac everything she knew about Malika, including the clubs she visited most often, the nights she usually went out, the brands she loved, the kind of men she always flirted with, and even the way she normally reacted when someone caught her attention. After listening to everything, Isaac simply smiled. If your analysis is right, she won't make this difficult. 3 nights in a row, Isaac visited the nightclub Malika frequented, but she never appeared. On the 4th night, just as he was beginning to think she had changed her routine, Malika finally walked through the entrance with 3 female friends. Isaac immediately noticed her. Without saying a word, he signaled one of the club managers. A few minutes later, the staff delivered the nightclub's most expensive VIP package to Isaac's private table. The extravagant display instantly attracted attention throughout the club. People couldn't help glancing toward the young man casually sitting alone in the VIP section, surrounded by premium champagne and luxury service. As Ayana had predicted, Malika noticed him almost immediately. Isaac slowly raised his glass and looked directly at her with a faint smile. After a brief pause, Malika smiled back. The trap had finally been set. About 20 minutes later, Isaac casually walked over to Malika's table with a glass in his hand. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" Malika looked him up and down before smiling. "Depends. Are you always this confident when talking to strangers?" Isaac laughed. "Only when the stranger is worth talking to." One of Malika's friends quietly smiled and nudged her arm before standing up with the others. "We'll give you two some privacy." Within minutes, Isaac and Malika were chatting as if they had known each other for years. Isaac never asked too many questions about her. Instead, he let Malika do most of the talking while occasionally complimenting her or making her laugh. The more attention Isaac gave her, the more interested she became. Nearly 2 hours later, Isaac glanced at his watch before smiling. "I'm not really ready to end the night yet," Malika smiled back. "Neither am I." Isaac looked into her eyes for a moment before speaking. "Then let's go somewhere quieter." Malika immediately understood what he meant. Without the slightest hesitation, she nodded, led the way. The two left the club together and arrived at one of the most luxurious hotels in Baltimore. After entering the presidential suite, Isaac loosened his tie and casually sat down on the couch. Malika slowly walked toward him before wrapping one arm around his shoulder. "I'll go take a shower first," Isaac smiled. "Take your time." Just as she reached the bathroom door, Isaac suddenly spoke again. "My phone died earlier tonight. Can I borrow yours for a minute? I just need to text my assistant and tell him not to schedule anything for me tomorrow." Malika didn't think twice. She unlocked her phone, handed it to Isaac, and smiled playfully. "Don't take too long." Before closing the bathroom door, she looked back and winked at him. "Wait for me." Isaac forced a smile, but the moment the bathroom door closed, his expression turned serious. He immediately pulled a small USB device from his pocket and connected it to the phone. Within seconds, software on the device began copying everything from Malika's phone. Isaac watched the progress bar climb slowly. 10%, 20%, 30%. Suddenly, the sound of running water stopped. Isaac's eyes widened. He immediately unplugged the device, placed the phone exactly where it had been, and sat back down just as the bathroom door handle moved. A second later, the door opened slightly. "Isaac?" Malika called out. "Yeah? Did my phone ring?" Isaac glanced at the screen. "No, everything's quiet." "Okay." She closed the door again. Isaac let out a slow breath before reconnecting the USB. The transfer resumed. 50%, 65%, 80%. Just before it reached 100%, the bathroom door suddenly opened again. Isaac reacted instantly, pulled out the USB, slipped it into his pocket, and picked up Malika's phone as if he had been reading a message. Malika walked over wearing a bathrobe. "Finished." Isaac smiled naturally and handed the phone back to her. "Thanks. My assistant knows I won't be available tomorrow." Malika placed the phone on the bedside table before moving closer to him. Just then, Isaac's own phone rang. He glanced at the screen and pretended to frown. "You've got to be kidding me!" Malika looked at him. "What's wrong?" Isaac sighed. "A problem at the company. Apparently one of our overseas clients wants an emergency meeting tonight." Malika looked disappointed. "Seriously?" Isaac nodded apologetically. "I hate doing this, but I have to go." He reached into his wallet, took out a hotel key card, and placed it on the table. "I've already paid for this suite for the next few days. Stay as long as you want. Order anything you like." Malika's disappointment quickly disappeared. She smiled again and kissed him on the cheek. "I guess I'll forgive you this time." Isaac smiled politely before walking out of the suite. The moment the elevator doors closed behind him, he reached into his pocket, took out the USB drive, and quietly smiled. The first part of their plan had worked perfectly. The moment Isaac returned home, Ayanna was already waiting for him in his office. As soon as he walked in, she immediately stood up. "Did it work?" Isaac smiled, took the USB drive from his pocket, and placed it on the desk. "I think so." Without wasting another second, he connected the drive to his computer. The copied data quickly began appearing on the screen. Photos, videos, contacts, messages, voice recordings. Hundreds of files filled the folders one after another. Isaac and Ayanna spent the next several hours going through everything. At first, they found nothing useful. Most of the messages were ordinary conversations between Malika and her friends. Just as Isaac was about to close one of the folders, Ayanna suddenly pointed at the screen. "Wait." Isaac stopped moving the mouse. Buried among dozens of ordinary voice notes was one file with no title, only a date from almost 2 years earlier. Isaac clicked it. A few seconds of silence passed before two familiar voices came through the speakers. It was Kanan and Malika. The recording captured them discussing Ayanna, the insurance policy, and waiting 2 years before making her death look like an accident. Every word matched the plan Ayanna had remembered after recovering her memory. Neither of them spoke while the recording played. When it finally ended, the room fell silent. Isaac slowly closed the laptop. Ayanna stared at the screen without saying a word. Isaac reached over and gently closed the laptop before placing his hand over hers. "You don't have to listen to the rest." Ayanna looked at him. "What do you mean?" "There are more recordings, more messages." He shook his head. "I don't want you hearing the way they talked about you. You've already suffered enough." Ayanna remained quiet for several seconds before giving a small nod. She trusted Isaac enough not to insist. From that moment on, Isaac reviewed every remaining file by himself while only telling Ayanna what she actually needed to know. By the following afternoon, he had organized every important message, voice recording, photograph, and document into a complete timeline. It was more than enough to expose the conspiracy between Kanan and Malika. Just as Isaac was about to contact the police, Ayanna suddenly stopped him. "Not yet." Isaac looked at her. "Why?" Ayanna slowly stood up and walked toward the window. "Tomorrow is the day the insurance company releases the money." Isaac immediately understood. Ayanna continued, "They've waited 2 years for that payout. They're not going to risk anything now." Isaac nodded slowly. "What are you thinking?" Ayanna turned around. "They're going to get married before claiming the money." Isaac frowned. "Married?" Neither of them truly trusts the other. Once they're legally married, they'll both feel safer knowing the money belongs to both of them. Isaac thought about it for a moment before smiling faintly. "So instead of arresting them today," Ayanna finished his sentence, "we let them believe they've won." The next morning, Isaac contacted the detective handling Ayanna's case and asked for a private meeting. Inside the conference room, Isaac presented every piece of evidence they had collected over the past several weeks. The detective and several investigators listened to the voice recordings one by one before comparing them with the text messages, photographs, financial records, and insurance documents. By the time the last recording ended, the room had fallen completely silent. The lead detective slowly closed the file in front of him. "This is more than enough for us to move forward." Isaac nodded. "Then let's finish this today." While the police were preparing the arrest warrants, Kanan and Malika were busy preparing for the happiest day of their lives. The wedding venue had been decorated with flowers and expensive crystal chandeliers. Friends and relatives congratulated the couple as they greeted guests with bright smiles. Neither of them looked nervous. To them, the hardest part of the plan was already over. During a quiet moment before the ceremony, Kanan wrapped an arm around Malika and smiled. "Tomorrow we'll finally receive the insurance payout." Malika leaned against him with a satisfied smile. $1 million. No more debt. No more worrying about money. Kanan laughed. "Who would have thought we'd actually pull it off?" Malika raised her glass. "To our new life." They clinked their champagne glasses together, convinced that everything had gone exactly according to plan. A few minutes later, the wedding ceremony began. The officiant had barely started speaking when the doors at the back of the hall suddenly swung open. Several police officers walked inside. The music stopped. Every guest turned around in confusion. The lead detective stepped forward. "Kanan, Malika, you're both under arrest." Before either of them could react, 2 officers placed handcuffs on their wrists. "What is this?" Kanan shouted. "There has to be some mistake." At that moment, another figure slowly walked through the entrance. The entire room froze. Kanan's face instantly turned pale. "Ayanna." Malika's eyes widened in disbelief. For a few seconds, neither of them could say a single word. Then Kanan suddenly forced tears into his eyes. "Ayanna? You're alive? I searched everywhere for you. I never gave up looking." Malika immediately followed his act. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she rushed forward before an officer stopped her. "Ayanna, thank God you're alive. I prayed for you every single day." Ayanna looked at both of them without the slightest emotion. A cold smile slowly appeared on her face. "Stop pretending. I know everything." Kanan's smile immediately disappeared. "What are you talking about?" Ayanna took one step forward. "I know exactly what the 2 of you planned 2 years ago. I trusted both of you with my whole heart, and you repaid that trust by trying to kill me for money." Kanan quickly regained his composure and laughed sarcastically. "Those are some serious accusations. Do you have any proof?" Before Ayanna could answer, Isaac calmly walked into the hall carrying a thick folder. He placed it on a nearby table in front of the detectives. "Everything you need is in there." The lead detective opened the folder and held up copies of the messages, photographs, and voice recordings that had already been verified during the investigation. Malika's face lost all color. She stared at Isaac in horror before screaming, "You set me up!" Isaac looked at her without saying a word. The lead detective closed the folder. "We've already reviewed every piece of evidence. You can explain yourselves at the station." As the officers began leading them away, Kanan desperately looked back at Ayanna one last time, but she didn't say another word. She simply watched as the two people who had betrayed her were taken out of the wedding hall in handcuffs, knowing their perfect plan had finally come to an end. Several months later, based on the voice recordings, text messages, photographs, financial records, and Ayanna's testimony, both Kanan and Malika were found guilty of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. As the judge announced the verdict, neither of them said a single word. The two people who had spent years planning the perfect crime were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, knowing they would be spending many years behind bars. After the trial, Ayanna finally returned to visit her grandparents. The moment they saw her walk through the front door, they rushed over and hugged her as tears streamed down all of their faces. They spent the entire afternoon talking about everything that had happened over the past year. Before Isaac left with Ayanna, her grandmother gently held his hands and said, "Thank you for bringing our granddaughter back to us." Isaac smiled warmly. "I was just lucky enough to find her. She was the one who found her way back." A few weeks later, Isaac brought Ayanna to meet his parents. Although she felt nervous before walking inside, Isaac quietly held her hand and smiled. His parents welcomed her with open arms from the moment she stepped through the door. They had already heard everything and treated her like family. By the end of the evening, the nervousness on Ayanna's face had completely disappeared, replaced by a smile she hadn't realized she'd been missing for a long time. Not long after, Isaac and Ayanna were married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by their families and closest friends. There were no extravagant decorations or celebrity guests, only the people who truly cared about them. As Ayanna walked down the aisle, she couldn't help thinking about everything she had survived to reach that moment. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac gently lifted her veil and kissed her as applause filled the room. A few days later, the newlyweds left for their honeymoon. Instead of choosing a famous tourist destination, Isaac brought Ayanna back to the same island where he had first found her washed ashore nearly 2 years earlier. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, a candlelit dinner had already been prepared on the beach. The waves rolled gently onto the sand while the moonlight reflected across the ocean. Ayanna quietly looked out at the sea before smiling. "It's strange. The place where I almost lost my life became the place where I found my future." Isaac reached over and held her hand. "And the best decision I ever made was taking that walk along the beach that day." Ayanna intertwined her fingers with his and smiled warmly. "I believe God brought us together exactly when we needed each other the most." Neither of them said another word. Beneath the moonlight, surrounded by the sound of the waves and the glow of the candles, they leaned toward each other and shared a long, gentle kiss, silently thanking God for turning the darkest chapter of their lives into a beautiful new beginning.